contentious, perhaps, death, and the fact that we maybe should spend more time thinking about it, or at least be a little bit more aware of it. I want to read a quote from that presentation that you gave on death in the present moment. As a matter of conscious experience, the reality of your life is always now, and I think that this is a liberating truth about the nature of the human mind. In fact, I think there's probably nothing more important to understand about your mind than that, if you want to be happy in this world. The past is a memory, it's a thought arising in the present. The future is merely anticipated, it is another thought arising now. What we truly have is this moment, and this. And we spend most of our lives forgetting this truth, refuting it, fleeing it, overlooking it. And the horror is that we succeed. We manage to never really connect with the present moment and find fulfillment there because we are continually hoping to become happy in the future. And the future never arrives. It is always now. However much you feel you need to plan for the future, to anticipate it, to mitigate risks, the reality of your life is now. Even when we think we're in the present moment, we are, in very subtle ways, always looking over its shoulder, anticipating what's coming next. We're always solving a problem. And it's possible to simply drop your problem, if only for a moment, and enjoy whatever is true of your life in the present. You say that your mind is all you have, just before that. What does that mean? And reflecting on that statement now, what did you hope that people took away from it?
Well, there's this, we've spoken about it a little bit already, there's this fundamental truth that you never truly arrive. If your attention is always purposed toward looking for the next thing, anticipating the next thing, if even in the presence of that very thing that was the next thing and now it's now, you are busy telling yourself a story about it. You know, if your engagement with it is mediated by thought in each moment, and you can't actually make contact with it, you can't. There's this dissatisfaction even in satisfaction, right? You get the thing you were longing for, and you have you're so distractible, you're so burdened by this automaticity of thought, this conversation you're having with yourself, that the present moment isn't even salient enough to you, right? And so it's a most of us, most of the time, live in that kind of, we get buffeted between anticipating the future and thinking about the past, and that flicker happens over even the present moment, right? I mean, we're just even in a conversation like this, like I'm saying something, if part of my attention is, well, I mean, have I gone on too long about this, or did that even make sense? There's part of me that is potentially talking to myself about the very conversation we're having now. Now, that is all too normal. Everyone is in that position. I mean, people who are listening to us now are struggling to follow my train of thought as I speak. One, because I'm long-winded, but two, my speech is competing with speech that is occurring to them in their head, right? They're saying, well, what's he talking about? Oh, Jordan didn't say that. Where does he get off talking about Jordan that way? And there's someone in their fucking head who seems to be them, but strangely not them, because if they're the one talking and also listening, why are they having that conversation in the first place, right? There's this people are looking over their own shoulder even when they're trying to seize the present with both hands, right? Even if they take my advice in that quote and say, okay, I got to be all about the now, right? The future never arrives, there's just now, so let's enjoy the now. What they will find is they lack the tools to really do that. And so one tool, again, is something like psychedelics, right? You take the requisite dose of LSD or psilocybin or MDMA. Again, these are potentially very different experiences, but they're what will happen under the aegis of any of those compounds is very likely you will have a full collision with the present moment of a sort that you have never had before if it's your first time on one of those drugs. And all of a sudden your sensory experience and even your conceptual experience will begin to unfold, and you will realize there is just much more here than you realize, right? Like everything becomes a kind of miracle. And the problem with that is that finding meaning in everything is crazy, right? You become the guy who's just like if I'm staring at this microphone, I come here stoned, and I'm just like, oh my God, that microphone is just that's not the guy you want on your podcast, right? So, but it is possible. It is possible to fall into the well of being such that the present moment lacks for nothing, right? You recognize that love, what you really mean by love, what you should mean by love, is not this transactional thing that you get going with a specific person because of your shared history together and because of their qualities that you happen to like. It is actually a state of being that you can just plunge into, and you recognize that this is the point of life is to recognize this more and more, right? And love is one facet to this jewel. Compassion is another. Just awe, is another. I mean, it gets different shadings depending on the environment you put it in. I mean, it gets like if you're in the presence of human or animal suffering, well, then compassion is the thing that gets amplified. But in real silence, and in a real undistracted collision with the present moment, when you don't have this voice in your head diverting you or coming up from behind seeming to be you, right? Like, what happens is people feel like a separate self. I mean, here, perhaps I should rewind for a second. Here's the starting point for 99.9% of humanity. People feel like a self. People feel like they're a subject in the middle of their experience, right? They feel like they're having an experience. They feel like they're on the edge of experience in some sense. They don't feel identical to experience, right? So an experience is, your 5 sensory channels and your mind, right? So you've got your seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking, feeling, emotions, and you've got this whole cacophony of what it's like to be you in each moment. And sometimes it's very, very pleasant, and sometimes it's very unpleasant, and sometimes it's just normal, and there's nothing really especially salient about it. And the default sense is to feel like a self in the middle of that, right? And it's that starting point that is actually the basis for all of our dissatisfaction and psychological suffering. I mean, that is the knot that has to be untied that really allows for a recognition of what the mind is like prior to identification with thought, and prior to this capture by this reflexive seeking and not finding operation that we're constantly engaged with. So, it's possible to. So, yes, on some level, certainly spiritually speaking, now is everything. There really is just consciousness and its contents in each moment, right? And there's never a reason to wait to recognize that, right? This isn't to disavow all the other projects we could have in human life that take some time to accomplish, right? I'm not saying everyone should just become a monk or go to a cave and starve. I mean, like, there are things that I like to do in the world and want to get done, and I have projects. But in each moment, the question is, what is available to attention, and why do you suffer, right? And if you're going to ask yourself, why do you suffer in each moment? Why is this moment just a little crappy, right? Why is it just not good enough? Why am I looking forward to this thing in an hour and am unable to locate a real ease of being now, before this good thing happens, before this uncertainty gets resolved, right? Before I hear from the doctor that I don't have the thing that I'm worried about. Like all of these contingencies. What's available now, what you find is, and meditation is the ultimate answer to this, in my view. You find is this on the part of virtually everyone, this basic incapacity to break the spell of identification with thought and just rest attention as consciousness in the present moment. And meditation is simply the act of doing that, ultimately. I mean, there are many techniques that can seem like something other in the beginning, but ultimately, if it works, meditation is the ability to look at this thing you thought was your ego, that you thought was yourself, that you thought was the homunculus that was in the middle of your experience, and not find it in a way that actually relieves you of the problem of egocentricity for that moment, right? And it might only last, in the beginning, it might only last a moment, right? And then you'll be lost in thought again. But the question is, once you learn to meditate, the question is always, what do you do next? And if you don't know how to meditate, well, you're just going to helplessly be thinking that thought. And you'll think it for as long as you'll think it, and it'll make you angry or sad or regretful or whatever, depending on its contents. And then you'll have to figure out how to rearrange your life on the basis of that thought so as to not be angry or sad or regretful. But once you know how to meditate, you can recognize thoughts as thoughts, and they just arise and disappear in this wider space of awareness, and you locate your well-being in that space as that space. But if all of that sounds like religious gibberish that is totally uninteresting, and it would have seemed that way to me when I was 18, the only thing for a hard-headed skeptic much of the time is an experience that snaps you out of your egocentric illusions for some period of time. And so for me...
Go to Peru,
or which I haven't done. I haven't done ayahuasca, but for me, psychedelics they were indispensable, because I was someone, had you confronted me as an undergraduate in college with whatever I just said, I would have, even if I had been convinced to try meditating for an hour, I wouldn't have had the aptitude for it such that I would have immediately noticed there was a there. I would have bounced off. I would have got the sense that it didn't work for me. Like most people, someone like Richard Dawkins is a perfect example. It's like I ambushed him on my podcast with 5 minutes of meditation, and
I thought you were going to say spiked the drink with
Richard.
a heavy dose of psilocybin.
I told Richard he should do psychedelics, but most people who are and this is especially true of hard-headed rationalists, skeptics, scientist types. They're so enamored of thought. Thought is the only appendage they have ever found by which to interface with reality, such that they can't imagine a mind prior to thought. They can't imagine a non-conceptual engagement with reality that reveals anything. It sounds like it sounds like brain damage, right? Like, my concepts are great. Like, you should have concepts as good as my concepts, right? What are you going to hit me on the head with a hammer? Yeah, then I'll have fewer concepts, right? But so when you point them inward, when you say, okay, just notice that, like, just try to focus on your breath for 10 seconds and notice how hard that is. Notice what happens. Notice that you get carried away by something that you are not authoring, right? Like, did you decide to get distracted about what's going to happen for lunch when I just told you to pay attention to your breath, and you were on it for 2 seconds, and now you're thinking about lunch? Like, is that at all interesting to you, that that's the hardest thing in the world, to just pay attention to anything? Some people find that interesting. Some people find that there's a sort of an intimation of a path there, like, okay, maybe there's something to discover here that could provide some relief to something that is in fact ailing me. But for many people, not. And then if you give those people some psychedelic experience, many of them recognize, oh, okay, there is a there. I don't know if this one is optimal. This is just different, but it's so different, and some of it is so pleasant, and some of it is so undermining of the bullshit that I generally find so captivating, that this is a counterpoint to how I've been living my life, right? And so I need more tools, and that's how many of us have got into meditation.
What is the role of feeling in this, whatever term you want to call it, the embodiment of emotions, the tapping into some sort of intuition? Because I resonate a lot with the cerebral horsepower model, relying on whatever it is cognitively that I've got that I can deploy on the thing that's in front of me. And I take a lot of pride in that. And I think a lot of people do. A lot of the people that will be listening to this podcast, listen to your podcast, will feel the same. You know, we take pride in our ability to wrangle the chaos of the world into some sort of order by thinking through things and taking concepts from different disparate areas and bringing them together and going, wow, that's really satisfying. I now understand the way that these two things could result in this third thing, and that third thing is... But it does, to me, in some ways, feel a little like a prison, and it's almost a prison of your own making, and it's one that you're proud of. You stand there with this gilded prison wall, and everything's coated in the toilet's fucking gold, and the floor's gold, and there's an open sky and all this stuff. What's the role of allowing some sort of embodiment or emotion or feeling to come back into this, to allow the cerebral stuff to slip away, but not to just be completely blank, to be able to hear what you're sort of truly feeling in the moment?
Yeah, well, it meditation. I mean, so the kind of meditation I recommend is generally called mindfulness, and it's initially it seems like a technique, and it's taught as a technique, but ultimately it's not a technique. It's not something you're doing more of. You're actually doing less of something, which is you're simply not being distracted by thought. And so when you have a feeling, when you feel joy or you feel sadness, mindfulness is, it's often thought of, especially when you're talking about negative feelings that people classically want to get rid of or diminish, like anxiety, right? It's often thought that mindfulness is a way of getting rid of those feelings, right? And ultimately it is, but it's not a way of getting rid of them born of an unwillingness to feel them, right? Like what you're doing when you're being mindful of an emotion is you're feeling it entirely. You're feeling it deeply. You're letting yourself become incandescent with that feeling. You're just not thinking about it anymore. And it's not that you're blocking thoughts. You're just noticing thoughts themselves arise along with the feeling, but you're noticing them from the point of view of this prior condition of awareness that can just see thoughts as thoughts, right? The default case is to not know that you're thinking, even if you could say that you know that you're thinking. In each moment, a thought is coming up from behind, and you just feel like it's you. And you're thinking about the thing that's making you angry, and that's making you angry. And so you're feeling anger, and then you're thinking about the thing that's making you angry. And that motherfucker, I can't believe, what was he thinking? And that's the voice in your head, and that feels like you, right? Like you have no perspective.
Is that not you?
No, it's no more than these sounds are you when you hear them, right? Like literally, it is like being asleep and dreaming. I mean, that's why many people I've titled my book and my app "Waking Up," and this is an ancient analogy, which is all too literal. Breaking the spell of thought is very much like waking up from a dream when you just didn't know you were having. Like you're asleep and dreaming. Let's leave aside lucid dreams, which are a different case. The normal case is you're asleep and dreaming, and you have no idea what your situation is. You are convinced you are in a totally different situation than you in fact are. You're actually safely in your bed, and yet you think you're somewhere else. You're at a nightclub. You're at the office. You're at the doctor's. Something, and it could be an emergency, and it's completely imaginary, right? It could have some point of contact with your life, but it's completely imaginary. And the amazing thing about dreams is the transition from sleep, from waking to sleep to dreaming, is one in which we never register a moment of surprise, right? Like it's just, it is amazing that your mind is capable. Like you go to sleep in your bed, and then the very next thing that happens to you as a conscious entity is totally discontinuous with where you were in your memory 15 minutes ago and where you in fact are in this moment. The laws of physics have been suspended. Dead people are now walking. I mean, literally talking to someone who's dead, and you're not even. You might be surprised they're dead.
I had a dream a couple of days ago that I'd committed a war crime, and the old cricket team that I used to play for 20 years ago was hunting me. And I'm pretty sure that you were there as a newscaster, So
it makes perfect sense.
Yes,
Yeah.
Obviously.
Yeah, but that failure of reality testing is something we are guilty of in every moment that a thought seems to be what we are, where it seems like our mind becomes identical to this voice in our head, where where you just feel like, again, you're listening to me, you're not grokking what I'm saying. The voice in your head says, what is he talking about? Was this Buddhism, or like what's this guy banging on about? Okay, that is just arising out of you know not where, right? There's a total fucking mystery at your back, and then you've got this language and in many cases imagery getting piped in from the stage right and stage left, and you can't figure out how to turn to see where any of this is coming from.
Where are thoughts coming from?
It's utterly, subjectively speaking, as a matter of experience, it's utterly mysterious, right? Like and once you break this spell, once you see, it's very much like waking up from a dream. Like once you begin to wake up from a dream, like it could be as bad or as seemingly consequential as possible, right? You're on a battlefield, you're being prosecuted, you're being chased as a war criminal, right? Your adrenaline is up. The moment your alarm goes off, and the dream is so insubstantial that in most cases you can't even remember it, right? Like it could have been really intense, and yet it's so discontinuous with your normal waking consciousness that when it begins to erode, sometimes you can just get this wisp of, wait, was there a beach? Like there's just nothing left, and yet it was all encompassing when you were having it. We live our lives, so that strikes us as perfectly normal, because basically we all dream when we're asleep, and it seems fine. Most dreams are fun or not, but no real consequence. We all live our waking lives having this conversation with ourselves, which is also totally normal. Everyone's doing it. And yet both of these conditions, being asleep and dreaming and not knowing it, and thinking every moment of the day and not really knowing it, and certainly not seeing any alternative to being identified with thought.
Our dads booked a tour of San Fran by e-scooter. Embarrassing. Until Frank rolled up. Bye, San Francisco. Hello, San Francisco. Explore over 300,000 travel experiences you'll remember. Do more with Viator.
Both of them are a kind of psychosis, and they really are. It's like they're so close to what we recognize in the canonically crazy people as psychosis, right? And so your thought is only really different from psychosis in that you have the good sense to keep your mouth shut in public, right? Like if you were helplessly exteriorizing all of this conversation, just talking to someone who's not there, in the way that you're talking to someone who's not there, in the silence of your own mind, you'd be the crazy person on the street who's talking to himself, right? It's not, and I'm not trivializing the tragedy of psychosis. I mean, there are other things going on there. There's classic thought disorder where you find Alex Jones credible, and you've just, every conspiracy theory is in fact real. But we've all accepted a status quo of more or less constant distraction by this inner voice. And it's universally subscribed, but it's not what is also universally subscribed is frank unhappiness and dissatisfaction. And it is the basis for our unhappiness and dissatisfaction.
Why is our inner voice so mean most of the time? If we spoke to friends or even strangers the way that we often speak to ourselves, we'd very quickly be on the receiving end of something that we probably didn't enjoy.
Yeah.
Why is it that we have this default, not everyone, but a lot of people, this default to converse with ourselves, if that's even the correct term, in a way which is horrible?
Well, it can be very wise to notice that, and to notice that very difference, and to just leverage that as a way of changing your inner voice. I mean, so this is your meditation is one thing, it's one remedy for what ails us, but there are other tools, and one tool is to just notice what you just noticed. It's you would never talk to your best friend the way that you talk to yourself, and you can learn to talk to yourself the way you would talk to your best friend, and then your mind is much more your friend. On some level, wisdom is a matter of making your mind your friend, right? And there are a few layers that can be addressed to do that, and one is the non-conceptual layer of what I'm calling meditation. Another is a conceptual layer of just noticing the character of this conversation and noticing how bizarre it is and contingent it is and how malleable it is ultimately. Like the moment you recognize that you don't have to change yourself as a person. Like you wouldn't talk to your friend this way. Like you're not this much of an not only you're not this much of an asshole to your friend, you're not an asshole at all to your friend. Like when if your friend is going through the very thing you're going through and beating yourself up over, you know exactly what you would say. You would successfully say it. You're not an imposter. You wouldn't have to fake saying it. Like you would just what would come out of you is a compassionate, let's just figure out how to improve the situation. Yeah, just this is there's regret is completely unhelpful. The past is past. You are a great, competent person who's got all kinds of tools. Let's make the most of them. Let's just
Meanwhile, you've got this despondent, horrible voice that you give yourself and a kick in the dick on the way out of the door.
Yeah, I think I said or wrote at some point that to a first approximation, wisdom is simply a capacity to take your own advice. Right? Like you effortlessly give that advice to others. If you could just give it and successfully receive it from yourself, you're basically Socrates. But as to why it has a negative character, I don't know that it does. I mean, I think some people don't have nearly the self-critical voice that's familiar to many of us, right? So I think there's probably something like a bell curve there where some people have a fairly happy and even somewhat happily delusional self-talk, and they're good company for themselves.
You often talk about the tension between being and becoming. It kind of feels a little bit like there's something going on here. I'm fascinated with this relationship between finding peace and happiness and gratitude with what you have, while asking for more from yourself and hoping that you can achieve to be able to feel gratitude and drive at the same time. Why this to me feels like a perpetual challenge, a perpetual difficulty, because the drive to do more often, not always, but often is driven from a sense of insufficiency. It's driven from a lack. I will be happy when, so on and so forth. But the thought of going through life and just leaving it all on the table because I'm just in this state of sort of constant orgasmic bliss, and I don't fucking need to do anything anymore because I'm just blissed out, man.
Yeah.
Also doesn't sound particularly, and I struggle to achieve that, no matter how much tantra I try. And talk to me, this tension between the drive to do more, the acceptance of who we are, the wanting to show up in the world and to give it everything that we've got, and the gratitude for the things that we already have.
Yeah, well, it is a constant tension, and I think you want to be biased on the being side of it. I mean, certainly if you've succeeded enough, right? Like if you recognize that you've won the lottery on some level, and you are in a position now where there are billions of people who would consider their prayers answered if they could trade places with you, right? And there'll be a time in your life where you would give anything to trade places with who you are now, right? Like when you're in your last months of life and you're terminally ill, or you've lost someone very close to you. I mean, there's when you have this moment in the sun where things are basically going well, right? I think it's appropriate to have a module in your mind which continually pings you, which says like if you can't enjoy this, right, if this is going to be wasted on you, you're never going to be happy, right? Like this, you should be able to enjoy this part. Like this is dessert, right? Dessert has arrived, and whatever story you have about all the other things you might do or become, this is really like this is a wonderful life, right? So can you settle into this at all with your attention, right? And if you can't, I think that's the problem to recognize, right? Like if the thing you should want to become is someone who's better at recognizing the beauty of your life moment to moment, right? Now there's a paradox there that ultimately has to be overcome, right? Like the wanting to become more spiritual, wanting to become a great meditator, wanting to become enlightened. That's, a knot that gets